I still remember the day she came back. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The kind of afternoon where nothing unusual ever happened. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, while the soft hum of the dishwasher filled the background. My husband, Daniel, was in the living room, working from home like he usually did. We had been married for 16 years. 16 peaceful, stable, comfortable years. Or at least, that's what I believed. The doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked toward the front door, expecting it to be a delivery. But when I opened the door, I saw a woman standing there. She looked to be around my age, maybe early 50s. Her hair was dark, styled neatly, and she wore a soft beige coat. There was something elegant about her, something composed. But what struck me most was the way she looked at me. Like she already knew me. "Hello," she said gently. Her voice was calm. Almost too calm. "Yes?" I replied politely. "I'm looking for Daniel." The moment she said his name, something inside me tightened. "Yes, he's here," I said slowly. "May I ask who you are?" She smiled softly. "Tell him. Emily is here." The name hit me like a sudden cold wind. Emily. I had heard that name before. Only once or twice, years ago, early in our marriage. Daniel's first love. The woman he had dated before me. The woman he almost married. I stood there for a moment, trying to keep my expression calm. "Please wait," I said quietly. I walked back into the house, my heart beating just a little faster. Daniel was sitting on the couch, laptop open, glasses resting low on his nose. "There's someone here for you," I said. He looked up. "Who is it?" I hesitated. "Emily." The color drained from his face instantly. He froze. For a moment, he didn't move at all. Then he slowly stood up. "Emily," he repeated softly. I nodded. He walked past me toward the door, and I followed quietly behind him. When he saw her, his entire expression changed. Shock. Confusion. Something else I couldn't quite name. "Emily," he said softly. She smiled. "Hi, Daniel." They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. Like time had suddenly stopped. Then she stepped forward. "It's been a long time." "Yes," Daniel replied quietly. "It has." I stood slightly behind them, watching. Observing. And that's when I felt it. Something wasn't right. I couldn't explain it yet. But I felt it. Emily turned toward me. "You must be Sarah," she said warmly. I nodded. "Yes. I've heard a lot about you." I glanced at Daniel. He looked slightly uncomfortable. "Oh, well, it's nice to meet you," I said politely. "May I come in?" she asked gently. Daniel hesitated for just a second. Then he stepped aside. "Of course." She walked into our home like she had once belonged there. And that was the moment everything began to change. She sat on the couch while Daniel and I sat across from her. There was a strange silence in the room. "So, what brings you here?" Daniel finally asked. Emily sighed softly. "I moved back to town." "Really?" Daniel said, surprised. "Yes. I've been living in Chicago for years, but I came back last week." "That's unexpected," he replied. She nodded. "I know. Life has a way of bringing us back, doesn't it?" I noticed how she looked at him when she said that. And again, something didn't sit right with me. She crossed her legs gracefully. "I thought about reaching out sooner, but I wasn't sure if you'd want to see me." Daniel smiled politely. "Well, it's definitely a surprise." She chuckled softly. "I imagine it is." Then she looked around our home. "You have a beautiful house." "Thank you," I said. And your children? She asked. 2, I replied. Both grown now. She nodded thoughtfully. That's wonderful. The conversation continued politely. But underneath it, there was tension. Unspoken. Uncomfortable. After about 20 minutes, she stood up. I should go. I didn't mean to interrupt your day. Daniel stood as well. It was nice seeing you. She smiled. Yes, it really was. Then she turned toward me. It was nice meeting you too, Sarah. You too, I said. She walked to the door. But before leaving, she turned back toward Daniel. Maybe we could catch up sometime, properly. Daniel hesitated. Then he nodded. Sure. She smiled again. Then she left. The door closed. And the house fell quiet. I looked at Daniel. He seemed lost in thought. Well, that was unexpected, I said gently. He nodded slowly. Yes, very unexpected. I watched him carefully. You didn't know she was coming back? No, he said quickly. Not at all. I nodded. But something in my chest still felt uneasy. Because the way she looked at him. The way she spoke. The way she walked into our home. It didn't feel like a simple reunion. It felt like the beginning of something else. And deep down, I knew. She didn't come back just to say hello. She came back for a reason. And I was going to find out what that reason was. Even if it changed everything. The next morning, I tried to push the thoughts out of my mind. After all, people run into old friends all the time. There was nothing unusual about that. At least, that's what I told myself. But Daniel was different that morning. He was quieter than usual. He sat at the breakfast table, stirring his coffee slowly, lost in thought. You okay? I asked gently. He looked up, slightly startled. Yeah, just thinking about work. I nodded, but I wasn't convinced. After 16 years of marriage, I knew when something was bothering him. And this morning, something definitely was. Later that afternoon, I was folding laundry in the bedroom when I heard his phone buzz. He was in the shower, so the phone lay on the bedside table. I wasn't someone who checked my husband's phone. I never had been. But when I saw the name on the screen, my heart skipped. Emily. I froze. The phone buzzed again. And again. I stared at it for a moment, my chest tightening. I told myself to walk away. To trust him. But then I saw the message preview. Last night meant more than I expected. My hands felt cold. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. The words were already enough. I stepped away from the phone just as Daniel came out of the bathroom. He picked up his phone casually. I watched his expression change. Just slightly. But I noticed. Everything okay? I asked. He quickly locked his phone. Yeah, just work. I nodded slowly. But now, the uneasiness inside me grew stronger. That evening, Daniel seemed distracted. He barely touched his dinner. You didn't eat much, I said. Not very hungry. Everything all right? Yeah, just tired. He gave me a small smile. But it didn't reach his eyes. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I noticed he stayed awake longer than usual. His phone screen lit up again. He turned slightly away from me. Typing quietly. I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep. But inside, my heart was racing. Because I already knew. Emily wasn't just visiting. She was back in his life. And I didn't know why. Or how far it would go. Over the next few days, things slowly began to change. Daniel started leaving the house more often. Just running errands, he would say. Meeting an old friend, he explained one afternoon. I didn't ask who. I already knew. One evening, he came home later than usual. Sorry, traffic, he said. But something felt off. His shirt smelled faintly of perfume. Not mine. A soft floral scent. I felt a quiet ache in my chest. But I said nothing. Because I wasn't ready to face what I was starting to suspect. A week later, Emily called our house. I answered. Hello? Hi, Sarah. It's Emily. Her voice was calm. Friendly. Too friendly. Oh, hello, I replied. I hope I'm not bothering you. No, it's fine. I was wondering if Daniel was home. He's still at work. Oh. I see. There was a short pause. How are you settling back into town? I asked politely. Still adjusting, she replied. It's strange being back after so many years. I imagine. She hesitated slightly. Would you mind if I stopped by sometime? I'd love to get to know you better. Her request surprised me. But I kept my voice calm. Sure, that would be fine. Thank you, Sarah. You're very kind. We ended the call. But something about the conversation made me uneasy. It felt calculated. Like she was trying to get closer. Not just to Daniel. But to me. And I couldn't understand why. 2 days later, she came over again. She brought a small gift. Homemade cookies. You didn't have to, I said. I wanted to, she replied warmly. She sat at the kitchen table while I made tea. She seemed relaxed. Comfortable. Like she had done this before. So, how did you and Daniel meet? She asked casually. Through mutual friends, I replied. She smiled. He always liked quiet, thoughtful women. Her words caught my attention. You remember that? I asked. She nodded softly. I remember a lot about Daniel. There was something in her tone. Something nostalgic. Something personal. And again. I felt that uneasiness return. She stayed for nearly an hour. Talking. Laughing. Sharing stories. But I noticed something. Every story somehow led back to Daniel. Their past. Their memories. Their time together. And with every story, I felt like an outsider in my own home. That night, I sat quietly in the living room after she left. Daniel walked in. I heard Emily stopped by. Yes, I replied. How was it? She seems nice. He nodded. She always was. The way he said it made my heart sink slightly. I looked at him carefully. You two must have been very close. He hesitated. Yeah, we were. Silence filled the room. And for the first time, I felt afraid. Because Emily wasn't just part of his past anymore. She was slowly becoming part of our present. And I didn't know how far she planned to go. But deep down, I knew one thing. She didn't come back by accident. She came back for a reason. And I was starting to believe. That reason was Daniel. Over the next week, Emily's presence became more frequent. At first, it was small things. A quick phone call. A short visit. A casual mention in conversation. But slowly, those small things started to grow. Daniel began mentioning her more often. Emily recommended a new restaurant downtown. Emily said the park reopened after renovations. Emily ran into one of our old friends. It was subtle, but noticeable. And every time he said her name, something inside me tightened. One afternoon, I was watering the plants in the front yard when I saw a familiar car pull up. Emily stepped out. She smiled warmly when she saw me. "Hi, Sarah." "Hi, Emily," I replied politely. I was nearby and thought I'd stop in for a minute. Of course. We walked inside together. She seemed relaxed, comfortable, like this had become routine. Daniel came down the stairs moments later. When he saw her, his face lit up slightly. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't obvious. But I noticed. "Emily," he said. "Hi, Daniel." They exchanged a warm smile. And again, that uneasy feeling returned. She stayed for nearly an hour. Talking about old memories. Laughing about stories from years ago. I listened quietly. Because most of those stories happened before I even knew Daniel. I felt like a guest in my own living room. Eventually, she stood to leave. "I should go. I don't want to keep you too." Daniel walked her to the door. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to tidy up. But I could hear their voices. Soft. Quiet. Personal. Then the door closed. Daniel walked back in. "She's been through a lot," he said. "Oh?" I replied. "She went through a difficult divorce a few years ago." I nodded slowly. "That must have been hard." "Yeah, she's been alone since then." There was sympathy in his voice. Concern. I didn't respond. But I understood what was happening. Emily wasn't just reconnecting. She was slowly becoming someone he worried about. Someone he cared about again. And that scared me more than anything. A few days later, Daniel told me he was meeting an old friend for coffee. I already knew who it was. "Have a good time," I said calmly. But inside, my thoughts were racing. I tried to distract myself. Cleaning. Cooking. Watching television. But I kept glancing at the clock. An hour passed. Then 2. Then 3. Finally, he came home. He looked relaxed. Comfortable. "How was it?" I asked. "Good," he said. "What did you do?" "Just talked, caught up." He smiled slightly. I nodded. But something inside me felt unsettled. Because this wasn't just catching up anymore. This was becoming routine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Daniel slept quietly beside me. But my mind wouldn't rest. I replayed everything in my head. The visits. The messages. The conversations. And one thought kept returning. She was getting closer. Closer to him. Closer to our life. And I didn't know how to stop it. The next morning, I decided to do something I rarely did. I called my friend Linda. We had known each other for years. She listened quietly as I explained everything. "So, his first love came back?" she asked. "Yes." "And now she's visiting often?" "Yes." Linda sighed. "That sounds uncomfortable." "It is." "Have you talked to Daniel about it?" "No. I don't want to seem insecure." Linda paused. "Sarah, you're not being insecure. You're being observant." I stayed quiet. "Just be careful," she added gently. Her words stayed with me. Because deep down, I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what yet. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Daniel came home early. "Emily invited us to dinner," he said. "Us?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, she wants to cook for us." I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to go. But another part of me felt like I needed to. "All right," I replied. That evening, we drove to her house. It was a small but elegant place. Warm lighting. Soft music. She welcomed us with a smile. I'm so glad you both came. Dinner was pleasant. She was charming. Kind. Funny. But I noticed something. She paid special attention to Daniel. Remembering his favorite foods. Laughing at his jokes. Finishing his sentences. Little things. Subtle things. But I saw them all. And with every moment, my uneasiness grew stronger. After dinner, she walked us to the door. Thank you for coming, she said. Thank you for having us, I replied. She turned to Daniel. It was really nice seeing you again. He smiled. Yes, it was. We drove home quietly. Neither of us spoke much. But as I stared out the window, one thought echoed in my mind. She wasn't just reconnecting. She was slowly stepping back into his life. And I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. After that dinner, things changed in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Emily was no longer just a visitor. She had become part of our routine. Daniel started mentioning her almost every day. Emily called earlier. Emily sent me an article. Emily asked about you. Each time, I nodded politely. But inside, I felt like something was slipping away, slowly, quietly. One afternoon, Daniel came home with a small bag. What's that? I asked. Oh. Emily baked some muffins and sent them for us. I forced a smile. That's thoughtful. He nodded, setting them on the kitchen counter. She remembered I liked blueberry. I froze slightly. She remembered. After all these years. I nodded slowly. That's nice. But something about that detail stayed with me. Because remembering someone's favorite food, after so many years. That wasn't casual. That was personal. A few days later, I noticed something else. Daniel had started dressing more carefully. He ironed his shirts more often. He changed his cologne. It was subtle, but noticeable. Meeting someone? I asked casually one morning. Just lunch with an old friend, he replied. I nodded. I didn't need to ask who. That afternoon, I couldn't focus on anything. I kept glancing at the clock. 2 hours passed. Then 3. When he finally came home, he looked relaxed. Almost happy. How was lunch? I asked. Good, he replied. What did you talk about? Just old times. He smiled slightly. I nodded. But deep inside, I felt something shifting. That night, as we watched television together, his phone buzzed. He picked it up. I noticed the small smile that appeared on his face. Who is it? I asked. Emily, he replied casually. I nodded. He typed quickly. Then set the phone down. But something about that moment stayed with me. Because I hadn't seen that kind of smile in a while. And it hurt more than I expected. The next weekend, something happened that made my uneasiness grow stronger. Daniel suggested we invite Emily over for dinner. The suggestion surprised me. You want to invite her? I asked. Yeah. I thought it would be nice. I hesitated. But I didn't want to seem uncomfortable. All right, I agreed. That evening, Emily arrived with a bottle of wine. She looked elegant, confident, comfortable. Like she belonged. Dinner was pleasant. Conversation flowed easily. But I noticed something again. Emily and Daniel shared memories I wasn't part of. Old jokes. Stories from their past. Little details. And every time they laughed together, I felt a quiet distance growing between us. After dinner, we moved to the living room. Emily leaned back comfortably. You two have built a beautiful life, she said softly. Thank you, I replied. She looked at Daniel. You always wanted something like this. Daniel smiled gently. Yeah. I did. Their eyes met briefly. And something passed between them. Something quiet but meaningful. I felt it. And I didn't like it. Later that night, after Emily left, I sat quietly in the living room. Daniel came back from walking her to the door. She seems happier, he said. Yes, I replied softly. I'm glad she came back. I nodded. But I didn't say anything else. Because I wasn't sure how I felt anymore. Over the next few days, I noticed something else. Emily started calling more often. Sometimes she spoke to me. Sometimes she asked for Daniel. Her voice was always warm. Friendly. But something about her tone made me uneasy. Like she was slowly getting closer. Not just to Daniel. But to our entire life. One afternoon, she called while Daniel was out. Hi, Sarah, she said. Hi, Emily. I hope you don't mind me asking, but is Daniel home? He stepped out for a bit. Oh. I see. There was a pause. Then she spoke again. He's always been very kind, hasn't he? Yes, he has. I missed that. Her words made me pause. Missed it? I asked gently. Yes. I missed having someone like him in my life. Something about her tone made my chest tighten. I kept my voice calm. I'm sure you'll find someone. She chuckled softly. Maybe. Then she changed the subject. But her words stayed with me. Because they didn't sound like someone moving on. They sounded like someone looking back. That evening, I told Daniel about the call. She mentioned missing you, I said carefully. He looked slightly uncomfortable. She's just going through a lot. I nodded. But I couldn't ignore the feeling growing inside me. Emily wasn't just reconnecting. She was slowly stepping back into his life. And I was starting to believe. She never truly left. Then one afternoon, something unexpected happened. I ran into Emily at the grocery store. She smiled warmly. Sarah. Hi, Emily. We walked together through the aisles. She seemed relaxed. Comfortable. So, how long have you and Daniel been married? She asked casually. 16 years. She nodded slowly. That's wonderful. She paused. He always wanted stability. Her words felt personal. Daniel has always been loyal, I replied gently. She smiled. Yes, he has. There was something in her expression. Something thoughtful. Something I couldn't quite understand. As we reached the checkout, she turned to me. You're lucky, Sarah. I smiled politely. Yes. I am. But as I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that her words meant more than they sounded. And deep down, I knew. Something wasn't right. And sooner or later, the truth would reveal itself. A few days after running into Emily at the grocery store, I noticed something else that made me uneasy. Daniel had started checking his phone more often. It wasn't obvious at first. Just small things. He would glance at his screen while we were having dinner. He would step outside briefly while talking. He would smile quietly at messages. Each time, I told myself not to overthink it. But deep down, I knew. One evening, we were sitting together in the living room when his phone rang. He looked at the screen, then stood up. I'll take this outside, he said. That was unusual. He rarely stepped outside for calls. I nodded calmly. But inside, my thoughts were racing. I watched him through the window as he stood on the porch. He spoke quietly. He smiled once. Then he nodded. After a few minutes, he came back inside. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, just an old friend. I nodded slowly. But I didn't ask who. Because I already knew. Later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. Not dramatically. Not suddenly. But quietly. Like something slipping through my fingers. The next morning, I decided to focus on something else. I cleaned the house. Ran errands. Tried to keep my mind busy. But when I returned home, I noticed something unusual. Daniel's car wasn't in the driveway. That wasn't strange by itself. But then I remembered. He had said he would be working from home that day. I checked the time. It was nearly noon. I called him. He answered after a few rings. Hey, he said. Where are you? I asked casually. Oh. I stepped out for a bit. Everything all right? Yeah, just grabbing coffee. Okay. We ended the call. But something didn't feel right. Because Daniel rarely left during work hours. And something about his voice sounded distracted. That afternoon, he came home. He looked relaxed. How was coffee? I asked. Good, he replied. Where did you go? Just a small place downtown. I nodded. But something inside me told me there was more. A few days later, my uneasiness grew stronger. I was in the kitchen when Daniel walked in holding his phone. Emily invited us to a small gathering this weekend, he said. A gathering? I asked. Just a few friends, nothing big. I hesitated. But I agreed. That weekend, we drove to Emily's house again. This time, there were a few other people. Old friends. Neighbors. The atmosphere was warm and relaxed. Emily greeted everyone with ease. She moved around comfortably, like she belonged. I watched her interact with Daniel. They laughed. They spoke quietly. They shared small moments. Nothing inappropriate. Nothing obvious. But enough to make me uneasy. At one point, I stepped outside for some fresh air. Emily joined me a few minutes later. Beautiful evening, she said softly. Yes, it is. She leaned lightly against the railing. You and Daniel seem very happy, she said. Yes, we are. She nodded slowly. He always deserved happiness. Her words sounded sincere. But something about them felt layered. I'm glad he found you, she added. I smiled politely. Thank you. She looked thoughtful. You know, sometimes life gives us second chances. Her words caught my attention. Second chances? I asked. She nodded. Yes, sometimes people find their way back to each other. My chest tightened slightly. I kept my voice calm. Sometimes, they do. We stood quietly for a moment. Then she smiled softly and went back inside. But her words stayed with me. Second chances. Finding their way back. I didn't like what that implied. On the drive home, I was quiet. Daniel glanced at me. You okay? Yes, just tired. He nodded. But I could tell he sensed something. That night, I lay awake again. Thinking. Observing. Trying to understand. Because Emily wasn't just reconnecting. She was slowly weaving herself back into Daniel's life. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. A few days later, something happened that made my heart sink. I was cleaning the living room when I noticed Daniel's phone on the coffee table. It buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Emily. The message preview appeared. Today reminded me of everything we once had. My hands felt cold. I stepped away quickly. I didn't want to read more. I didn't want to cross that line. But I didn't need to. The message said enough. When Daniel came back into the room, he picked up his phone. His expression shifted slightly. Then he locked the screen. I pretended not to notice. But inside, my heart felt heavy. Because now, it wasn't just my imagination. Something was happening. Something quiet. Something complicated. And I didn't know how far it would go. But deep down, I knew one thing. Emily didn't just come back to visit. She came back with a purpose. And I was starting to believe. That purpose was to reclaim something she once lost. And I wasn't going to let that happen. Not without understanding the truth. That night, I barely slept. The message I had seen kept replaying in my mind. Today reminded me of everything we once had. The words were simple. But they carried weight. Memories. Feelings. Something deeper than casual friendship. I lay beside Daniel, listening to his quiet breathing, wondering if he was thinking about her too. In the morning, everything felt normal again. Daniel made coffee. I prepared breakfast. We spoke about small things. The weather. Errands. Our daughter calling later. But underneath it all, something had changed. At least for me. Because now, I wasn't just uneasy. I was alert. Watching. Listening. Trying to understand. Later that afternoon, Daniel told me he was going out again. Just meeting Emily for coffee, he said casually. At least this time, he was honest. I nodded calmly. Okay. But inside, I felt a quiet ache. Because it was becoming routine. And routines build connections. When he left, I sat quietly in the living room. The house felt unusually silent. I tried to read. But my mind kept drifting. After an hour, I decided to step outside. The fresh air helped. I walked slowly around the neighborhood. Trying to clear my thoughts. That's when I ran into my neighbor, Margaret. We chatted briefly. How have you been? She asked. Good, I replied. She smiled. I saw Daniel earlier. You did? Yes, he was downtown. Looked like he was meeting someone. My chest tightened. Oh, probably Emily, I said calmly. Margaret nodded. Yes, that's her name. She smiled politely and continued walking. But her words stayed with me. Because now, it wasn't just me noticing. Others were noticing too. When Daniel returned home later that afternoon, he looked relaxed. How was coffee? I asked. Good, we talked for a while. I nodded. He smiled slightly. She's doing better lately. I stayed quiet. Because I didn't know how to respond anymore. That evening, something else happened. Emily called again. Daniel answered. They spoke for several minutes. I sat quietly nearby, pretending to watch television. But I could hear his tone. Warm. Comfortable. Familiar. After he hung up, he turned toward me. She invited us to a small concert next weekend. Us? I asked. Yes, she thought we'd enjoy it. I nodded slowly. All right. But inside, I felt tired. Because it seemed like Emily was slowly filling our calendar. Our time. Our space. The concert came the following weekend. It was a small outdoor event. Soft music. Dim lights. A relaxed atmosphere. Emily greeted us warmly. She looked elegant. Confident. Comfortable. We sat together. Listening to the music. At one point, Emily leaned slightly toward Daniel. Saying something quietly. He laughed softly. I watched them. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Distance. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But real. After the concert, we walked together to the parking lot. Emily turned to Daniel. "I'm really glad you came." He smiled. "Me too." She looked at me. "Thank you for coming, Sarah." "Of course." She smiled softly. Then she left. On the drive home, I stared out the window. The streetlights passed slowly. Daniel glanced at me. "You're quiet." "Just tired," I replied. He nodded. But I could tell he sensed something. The next morning, I decided to talk to my friend Linda again. "She's becoming part of everything," I explained. Linda listened carefully. "That sounds uncomfortable." "It is." "Have you talked to Daniel?" "Not yet." Linda paused. "Sarah, sometimes silence creates more distance." I stayed quiet. Because I knew she was right. But I wasn't ready yet. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Emily showed up again, unannounced. I opened the door. She smiled warmly. "Hi, Sarah." "Hi." I was nearby, thought I'd stop in. "Come in." She walked inside. Looking comfortable. Relaxed. Like she belonged. Daniel came downstairs moments later. "Emily," he said, surprised. "Hi," she replied. She sat on the couch. We talked casually. But I noticed something. She watched Daniel closely. Her expression softened when he spoke. Her voice warmed when she addressed him. And suddenly, everything became clearer. She wasn't just reconnecting. She was still emotionally attached. And that realization made my heart sink. Because now, the situation wasn't just uncomfortable. It was complicated. Very complicated. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. Later that evening, after Emily left, I sat quietly in the kitchen. Daniel joined me. "She seems happier lately," he said. "Yes," I replied softly. He poured himself a glass of water. "She's been through a lot." I nodded. But then, I finally spoke. "Daniel, do you think she still has feelings for you?" He froze slightly. "What?" "I'm just asking." He hesitated. "I don't know." There was silence. Then he added quietly. "Maybe." And that single word made everything feel heavier. Daniel's answer stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Maybe. It was a simple word. But it carried a lot of meaning. That night, we went to bed quietly. Neither of us spoke much. I could feel the distance between us, not physical, but emotional. Something had shifted, and we both knew it. The next morning, everything felt slightly different. Daniel was polite. Kind. Normal. But there was a quiet tension in the air. We moved around each other carefully, like we were both trying not to disturb something fragile. Later that afternoon, I decided to go out for a walk. The fresh air usually helped clear my thoughts. But that day, my mind kept returning to the same question. Why had Emily really come back? Was it just coincidence? Or was there something more? I walked slowly through the park near our house. Families sat on benches, children played nearby, and everything looked peaceful. But inside, I felt unsettled. That's when I noticed something unexpected. Across the park, I saw Daniel. He was sitting at a bench. And Emily was sitting beside him. I froze. I hadn't expected to see them there. They looked relaxed. Comfortable. They were talking quietly. Then Emily laughed softly. Daniel smiled. I stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. Part of me wanted to walk away. But another part of me told me to stay calm. I took a slow breath and walked toward them. As I approached, Daniel looked up. He seemed surprised. "Sarah?" "Hi," I said calmly. Emily smiled politely. "Hi, Sarah. I didn't know you were meeting here," I said gently. Daniel hesitated. "Oh, we just ran into each other." I nodded slowly. "Of course." I sat beside them. The conversation became polite, careful. But the mood had changed. After a few minutes, Emily stood up. "I should get going." She smiled at both of us. "Nice seeing you." Then she walked away. Daniel looked at me. "You okay?" "Yes," I replied quietly. We walked home together. But neither of us spoke much. Because we both knew things were becoming more complicated. Over the next few days, I noticed Daniel becoming quieter. More thoughtful. He spent more time alone. Sometimes staring at his phone. Sometimes lost in thought. I didn't ask questions. But I noticed everything. One evening, he came home later than usual. "Sorry," he said. "I got caught up talking to Emily." I nodded. But inside, I felt a quiet sadness. Because it wasn't just casual anymore. They were spending more time together. And I could feel the distance growing. That weekend, Emily invited us to lunch. I agreed. Part of me didn't want to go. But another part of me wanted to understand her better. We met at a small restaurant downtown. Emily looked elegant as always. She greeted us warmly. Lunch started pleasantly. But then, the conversation shifted. Emily began sharing stories from the past. Her past with Daniel. "How do you remember that?" Daniel asked, smiling. "I remember everything," she replied softly. Their eyes met briefly. I looked down at my plate. Feeling like an outsider again. After lunch, we walked outside together. Emily turned to Daniel. "I'm glad we found each other again." Her words felt deliberate. Daniel nodded quietly. "Yes, me too." Something inside me tightened. Because her words sounded intentional. Like she was saying more than she spoke. That night, I sat alone in the living room. Thinking. Observing. Trying to understand. Emily's behavior wasn't accidental. She wasn't just reconnecting. She was trying to rebuild something. Something she once had. And Daniel, he wasn't stopping her. That realization made me uneasy. Because I wasn't just worried about Emily. I was worried about Daniel too. Because sometimes, old feelings don't disappear. Sometimes, they just wait quietly. Until the right moment returns. A few days later, something unexpected happened. Emily called me directly. "Hi, Sarah," she said. "Hi. I was wondering if we could meet, just the two of us." Her request surprised me. "Just us?" I asked. "Yes. I'd like to talk." I hesitated. But something told me I should agree. "All right," I said. We agreed to meet the next afternoon. After hanging up, I felt nervous. Because I didn't know what she wanted. But I had a feeling. This conversation would change things. And I was right. The next afternoon, I arrived at the small cafe we had chosen. Emily was already there. She smiled warmly as I sat down. "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course." She looked thoughtful. Then she spoke quietly. "Sarah. I want to be honest with you." My heart began to beat faster. I still care about Daniel. Her words hung in the air. Calm. Direct. Unexpected. I stayed silent. She continued. "I know he's married." I respect that. But I can't pretend my feelings don't exist. I took a slow breath. Why are you telling me this? I asked gently. She looked at me calmly. Because I don't want secrets. Her honesty surprised me. But it also made everything more complicated. Because now, the truth was clear. Emily hadn't just come back. She had come back with feelings. And that meant everything was about to change. I sat there quietly, absorbing what Emily had just said. I still care about Daniel. Her voice had been calm. Steady. Almost gentle. But her words felt heavy. I looked at her carefully. And Daniel? I asked softly. She hesitated for a moment. I don't know, she admitted. But I think he still cares about me too. Her honesty was unsettling. Not because she sounded aggressive or manipulative. But because she sounded sincere. And sincerity made it harder to dismiss her. I folded my hands quietly on the table. Emily. Daniel and I have been married for 16 years. I know, she said gently. And we've built a life together. I know that too. There was silence between us. Then she spoke again. I'm not trying to hurt you, Sarah. Her words felt genuine. But feelings don't always disappear, even after many years. I took a slow breath. Why did you come back now? I asked. She looked down briefly. My mother passed away last year, she said quietly. I'm sorry, I replied softly. She nodded. She always lived here. After she passed, I didn't have a reason to stay in Chicago anymore. Coming back felt right. I listened carefully. And when I came back, she continued, I realized I still cared about Daniel. Her words were calm. But the meaning behind them was clear. She wasn't hiding anything anymore. She was being open. Direct. Honest. And that made the situation even more complicated. Because she wasn't acting like someone trying to steal something. She was acting like someone following her heart. And that made it harder to feel angry. But it didn't make it easier either. We sat quietly for a moment. Then she looked at me again. You must think I'm selfish. I shook my head slowly. No. I think you're honest. She gave a small, sad smile. I don't want to come between you two. But you already are, I said gently. She nodded. Yes. I suppose I am. Her honesty surprised me again. Then she leaned slightly forward. I just want you to know. I'm not trying to manipulate anyone. I just needed to be honest. I nodded slowly. I appreciate that. After a few more minutes, we finished our coffee. We stood up. She looked at me quietly. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being honest, I replied. We walked out of the cafe together. Then we went our separate ways. On the drive home, my mind was filled with thoughts. Emily had been honest. Calm. Respectful. But her words had changed everything. Because now, the situation wasn't just suspicion. It was real. She had feelings. And she believed Daniel might still have feelings too. When I arrived home, Daniel was sitting in the living room. How was your afternoon? He asked. I hesitated. Then I sat beside him. I met Emily, I said. His expression changed slightly. Oh. She wanted to talk. What about? I looked at him carefully. She told me she still has feelings for you. He froze. His eyes widened slightly. She said that? Yes. There was silence. Then he leaned back slowly. I didn't know she would tell you that. I watched him carefully. Did you know she felt that way? He hesitated. I suspected. My chest tightened slightly. And you didn't tell me? I wasn't sure, he replied quietly. I nodded slowly. There was another long silence. Then I asked the question that had been forming in my mind. Daniel, do you still have feelings for her? He looked down. Quiet. Thoughtful. Then he spoke softly. I don't know. That answer hurt more than I expected. Because it wasn't denial. It was uncertainty. And uncertainty meant possibility. That night, neither of us slept well. We lay quietly beside each other, lost in our own thoughts. The next morning, everything felt different. More fragile. More uncertain. We spoke politely. Kindly. But something had changed. The comfort we once shared felt slightly distant. And I realized. Emily's return hadn't just stirred old memories. It had opened a door. A door that led to questions. To doubts. To possibilities. And once that door opens, it's hard to close it again. Over the next few days, Daniel seemed quieter. More thoughtful. He spent more time alone. Sometimes staring out the window. Sometimes lost in thought. I didn't pressure him. Because I knew he was trying to understand his own feelings. And I needed to understand mine too. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Daniel sat beside me in the living room. I met Emily today, he said quietly. I nodded. How was it? We talked. About what? He took a deep breath. About everything. I waited. Then he spoke softly. She told me she still loves me. My heart sank. Anne? I asked gently. He looked at me. I told her. I needed time. I nodded slowly. Because that answer told me everything. He wasn't rejecting her. He wasn't accepting her either. He was undecided. And that was the hardest place to be. Because it meant our future wasn't as certain as I once believed. And deep down, I knew the real truth about Emily still hadn't been revealed. And when it did, everything might change. The following days felt unusually quiet. Daniel and I moved through our routines, but everything felt slower, heavier. We were careful with our words. Careful with our emotions. It wasn't anger between us. It was uncertainty. And uncertainty can sometimes feel more difficult than conflict. One evening, while Daniel was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I wasn't the kind of person who checked his phone. In 16 years of marriage, I had never felt the need. But this time, I glanced at the screen. It was Emily. The message preview appeared briefly. I found something. I think you should know. My heart skipped. I stepped back immediately. I didn't open the message. But my mind started racing. What had she found? And why did she message Daniel instead of me? A few minutes later, Daniel came out of the bathroom. He picked up his phone. I watched quietly as his expression changed. What is it? I asked gently. He hesitated. Emily says she found something about her past. About her past? I repeated. He nodded slowly. She wants to meet tomorrow. I felt a strange uneasiness settle inside me. Did she say what it was? No, he replied. Just that it's important. The next day, Daniel asked if I wanted to come with him. I appreciated that. Yes, I said. We met Emily at a quiet cafe. She looked nervous. That was the first time I had seen her like that. Usually, she appeared calm, confident. But today, her hands trembled slightly as she held her coffee cup. Thank you for coming, she said softly. What did you want to show us? Daniel asked. Emily took a deep breath. Then she reached into her bag. She pulled out a small envelope. I found this while going through my mother's things. She handed it to Daniel. He opened it carefully. Inside were old photographs. He looked at them slowly. Then his expression changed. What is it? I asked quietly. He handed one of the photos to me. It showed Daniel and Emily many years ago. But they weren't alone. Emily was holding a baby. I looked at the photo again. Confused. Emily. Daniel said slowly. She nodded. I never told you, but after we broke up, I found out I was pregnant. The world seemed to pause. Daniel stared at her. You, what? I had a daughter, Emily said softly. Silence filled the space between us. I felt my heart racing. You had a child? Daniel whispered. She nodded. Yes. And you never told me? Her eyes filled with tears. I was young, scared, and my mother convinced me it would be better if I raised her alone. Daniel leaned back slowly, trying to process everything. Where is she now? He asked. Emily hesitated. She passed away. Daniel looked stunned. What happened? She was sick, Emily whispered. She passed away when she was 12. The sadness in her voice felt real. The cafe felt unbearably quiet. I looked at Daniel. His face showed shock, sadness, confusion. I didn't know, he said softly. I know, Emily replied. Tears rolled down her cheeks. I didn't tell you because I thought it would complicate your life, and by the time I wanted to tell you, it felt too late. Daniel looked down at the photographs. His hands trembled slightly. That means, he whispered. Emily nodded. Yes, she was your daughter. The words hung heavily in the air. I felt a wave of emotions. Shock. Sadness. Confusion. But something inside me also felt unsettled. Because something about the story didn't feel complete. I looked at the photographs again. Then I looked at Emily. Emily, I said gently. Yes? Do you have any other proof? She looked surprised. What do you mean? I mean, documents, records, anything? Daniel looked at me. Sarah. But I shook my head gently. I'm not doubting your pain. I just think we should understand everything clearly. Emily hesitated. Then she nodded slowly. I have some papers at home. Daniel remained silent. But I could see something in his eyes. He wasn't just sad. He was overwhelmed. Because suddenly, the past had returned. In a way none of us expected. And deep down, I couldn't ignore the feeling growing inside me. Something about this story still didn't feel right. And I knew this wasn't the full truth. Not yet. The drive home was silent. Daniel held the photographs carefully in his hands, staring at them as if trying to understand something that no longer existed. I watched him quietly. 16 years. 16 years of marriage, and suddenly, everything felt different. Not broken. Not destroyed. But shaken. Finally, Daniel spoke. I had a daughter. His voice was barely above a whisper. I reached over and gently placed my hand on his arm. You didn't know, I said softly. He nodded. But she was out there, all those years. His voice carried regret. And sadness. I understood. Even though I felt unsettled, I could still see the pain in his eyes. No parent should learn about a lost child this way. When we reached home, Daniel went straight to the living room. He sat quietly, still holding the photographs. I went to the kitchen and made tea. When I returned, he looked up at me. Do you think she's telling the truth? It was the first time he had asked the question aloud. I hesitated. I don't know, I answered honestly. He nodded slowly. I want to believe her. I understand. But something feels sudden. I nodded. Yes. We sat quietly. Because both of us were thinking the same thing. The story had come out of nowhere. After years of silence. After her sudden return. It was a lot to process. The next day, Emily invited us to her house. She said she had documents to show us. We arrived in the afternoon. Emily welcomed us inside. She looked nervous again. She brought a small folder and placed it on the table. These are the documents I found, she said softly. Daniel opened the folder carefully. Inside were several papers. A birth certificate. Medical records. School documents. Everything looked old, worn, real. Daniel studied the birth certificate. He froze. What is it? I asked gently. He turned the paper toward me. The father's name section was blank. She never put my name, Daniel said quietly. Emily nodded. I was scared, and my mother told me it would be easier that way. Daniel nodded slowly. I watched carefully. Everything seemed believable. But something still felt incomplete. I looked at the documents again. Then something caught my eye. The child's name. Lily. It was written clearly. I looked at Emily. She was beautiful, Emily said softly. Daniel swallowed. I wish I had known her. Emily nodded. So do I. Her voice trembled again. We spent another hour talking quietly. Emily shared stories about Lily. Her favorite color. Her love for drawing. Her laughter. Daniel listened carefully. Absorbing every word. When we left, Daniel looked emotionally drained. He held the folder carefully. We drove home quietly. That evening, Daniel sat alone in the living room. Looking through the documents again. I sat beside him. He handed me a small photo. It showed Lily smiling. She looked about 8 years old. She had dark hair. Gentle eyes. She looked happy. She looks like you, I said softly. Daniel nodded. I keep thinking, what if I had known? His voice was filled with regret. I squeezed his hand gently. You didn't know. He nodded. But the sadness remained. Later that night, after Daniel went to bed, I stayed awake. Something kept bothering me. I couldn't explain it. Everything Emily showed us looked real. But my instincts told me to be careful. I went back to the living room. I picked up the folder again. I looked through the documents slowly. Carefully. That's when I noticed something. The dates. One of the medical records had a date that didn't match. It was subtle. But noticeable. I checked again. Then I checked another document. Another inconsistency. Small. But strange. My heart began to beat faster. I looked through everything again. And the more I looked, the more something didn't feel right. I sat back slowly. Because a quiet realization began to form. Emily's story might not be entirely true. And if that was the case, then her return, her feelings, her daughter, everything, might be part of something much deeper. Something we hadn't yet discovered. And for the first time, I felt certain. Emily had come back for a reason. And I was getting closer to uncovering the truth. I didn't sleep much that night. The documents sat on the coffee table, and I kept replaying everything in my mind. The dates. The handwriting. The missing details. They were small inconsistencies, but they were there. And sometimes, small inconsistencies reveal bigger truths. The next morning, Daniel noticed I looked tired. "Did you sleep okay?" he asked. "Not really," I admitted. He nodded. "I couldn't sleep either." He picked up the folder again. I kept thinking about her, about Lily. I watched him quietly. Then I decided to speak carefully. "Daniel, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you remember when you and Emily broke up?" He thought for a moment. "Yes, it was about 17 years ago." "And after that, did you ever hear from her again?" "No," he replied. "She moved away shortly after." I nodded slowly. Then I gently pointed at one of the documents. "This medical record, it says Lily was born 8 months after your breakup." Daniel frowned. "That's not possible." I nodded quietly. "Unless, the dates are wrong." He looked closer. His expression slowly changed. "You're right." He flipped through another document. "And this one says she started school in a different state, but Emily told us she lived here the whole time." We exchanged a quiet look. Daniel leaned back slowly. "You think something's not right?" "I don't know," I said softly. "But I think we should be careful." Daniel sat silently for a moment. Then he nodded. "Yes, we should." Later that afternoon, Daniel received a message from Emily. "I was thinking about Lily today. I found more photos. Would you like to see them?" Daniel showed me the message. I nodded. "Let's go." We drove to Emily's house again. This time, I paid closer attention. Emily greeted us warmly. But I noticed something different. She seemed watchful. Careful. Like she was studying our reactions. She brought another envelope. "These are more photos," she said softly. Daniel opened them. He smiled sadly as he looked at each picture. I watched carefully. Then something caught my attention again. One of the photos. It showed Lily at what looked like a birthday party. There was a cake in front of her. But the cake had a bakery logo. I leaned closer. I recognized it. It was a local bakery that had only opened 5 years ago. My heart skipped. But Emily said Lily passed away years ago. I stayed calm. I didn't say anything yet. Daniel continued looking at the photos. Emily watched him carefully. "You look just like her," she said softly. Daniel swallowed. "I wish I had met her." Emily nodded, pretending to wipe away a tear. But now, something felt different. Because the more I looked, the more the pieces didn't fit. Later, as we left Emily's house, I waited until we were in the car. "Daniel." "Yes?" "That bakery in the photo, did you notice it?" He shook his head. "No." I explained quietly. "That bakery opened 5 years ago." Daniel froze. "That's impossible." I nodded. If Lily passed away 12 years ago, that photo shouldn't exist. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly. "You think she's lying?" "I don't know," I said carefully. "But something doesn't add up." Daniel stayed silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke quietly. "I don't understand, why would she lie about something like this?" That was the question. And I didn't have an answer yet. But I had a feeling. We were getting closer to the truth. And whatever that truth was, it might change everything. That night, Daniel sat quietly beside me. "I don't know what to think anymore," he admitted. "I know," I replied softly. He sighed. "I want to believe her, but the evidence doesn't match." He nodded. "Yes." We sat quietly. Then Daniel looked at me. What should we do? I thought for a moment. Then I answered carefully. I think we should find out the truth ourselves. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. I agree. And in that moment, we made a quiet decision. We weren't going to confront Emily yet. Instead, we were going to uncover the truth first. Because something about Emily's story was beginning to unravel. And soon, her true identity would finally be revealed. The next morning, Daniel and I sat quietly at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes. We were both thinking about the same thing. Emily's story. The inconsistencies. The photographs. And the possibility that something wasn't right. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. I never thought I'd be questioning something like this. I know, I said gently. He rubbed his forehead slowly. If she's lying, I don't understand why. That's what we need to find out, I replied. Daniel nodded. So, where do we start? I thought for a moment. The hospital records, I suggested. He looked at me. You think we can check them? It's worth trying. Daniel agreed. Later that afternoon, we drove to the hospital listed on the medical records Emily had shown us. The building looked older, but still active. We walked inside together. The receptionist greeted us politely. How can I help you? Daniel hesitated. Then he explained carefully. We're trying to verify some old records, from about 15 years ago. The receptionist nodded. Let me see what I can do. She asked for the child's name. Lily, Daniel said quietly. She typed into the computer. Then she frowned slightly. I'm sorry. I don't see any record with that name. Daniel looked surprised. Could you check again? She nodded and searched again. After a moment, she shook her head. I'm sorry, there's nothing here. Daniel and I exchanged a quiet glance. Are you sure? I asked gently. Yes, she replied kindly. If she was treated here, there would be a record. We thanked her and walked outside. The air felt heavier. Daniel stood silently near the car. That's not possible, he whispered. I didn't say anything. Because now, things were becoming clearer. And more concerning. On the drive home, Daniel looked troubled. I don't understand, why would she create fake documents? I don't know yet, I replied softly. He sighed. Maybe we should talk to her. I shook my head gently. Not yet. He looked at me. Why? Because we still don't know everything. Daniel nodded slowly. You're right. That evening, something unexpected happened. Daniel received another message from Emily. I've been thinking. I'd like to invite you to dinner tomorrow. Just you and me. There are things I want to talk about. Daniel showed me the message. I looked at him quietly. What do you think? He asked. I thought for a moment. I think you should go. He looked surprised. You're okay with that? Yes, I said calmly. Why? Because she might reveal something. Daniel nodded slowly. All right. The next evening, Daniel left for dinner. I stayed home, trying to remain calm. But my mind was filled with thoughts. An hour passed. Then another. Finally, Daniel returned. He looked unsettled. How did it go? I asked gently. He sat down slowly. She told me something strange. What? Daniel hesitated. She said she's been having financial problems. I listened carefully. And? She said she's thinking about moving away again. I frowned slightly. That seems sudden. He nodded. Yes, but then she said something else. What? Daniel looked at me. She asked if I could help her. My chest tightened slightly. Help her, how? She didn't say directly, but she mentioned she was struggling financially. I nodded slowly. Everything was starting to make sense. Daniel. Yes? I think this might be the reason she came back. He looked at me quietly. You think she's lying, for money? I don't know, I replied carefully. But the timing, the fake documents, the emotional story, it all feels connected. Daniel leaned back slowly. I don't want to believe that. I understand. He sighed. But it does seem possible. We sat quietly. Then Daniel spoke softly. She also said something else. What? She said, she feels like we're meant to reconnect. That statement felt heavy. Because now, it wasn't just about money. It was about emotions, manipulation, and possibly something deeper. I looked at Daniel. Did she ask you directly for money? No, he replied. Not yet. I nodded slowly. Because I had a feeling. That moment was coming. And when it did, Emily's true intentions would finally be revealed. That night, Daniel seemed restless. He kept pacing slowly around the living room, his hands in his pockets, lost in thought. I just don't understand, he said quietly. She seemed so sincere. I know, I replied gently. But sometimes sincerity can be practiced. He stopped walking and looked at me. You really think she's lying? I think something isn't right, I answered carefully. Daniel nodded slowly. Then he sat beside me. I keep thinking about that photo, the one with the bakery. Yes, I said. That's when I started feeling unsure. We sat quietly for a moment. Then Daniel spoke again. She also mentioned something else at dinner. What? I asked. She said she's behind on her rent. I looked at him carefully. And? She didn't ask directly, but she hinted that she might lose her apartment. I nodded slowly. The pattern was becoming clearer. Emotional story. Financial trouble. Hints. Gradual pressure. It all seemed deliberate. But I still didn't want to jump to conclusions. Because sometimes, life really is complicated. The next morning, I decided to do something simple. I searched Emily's name online. I didn't expect much. But sometimes small details can reveal big truths. After a few minutes, I found something interesting. A social media profile. Emily's. Her photos looked recent. She seemed happy. Traveling. Dining at restaurants. Shopping. None of it looked like someone struggling financially. My heart beat faster. I kept scrolling. Then I saw something else. A photo from 3 years ago. Emily standing beside a man. They looked close. Very close. The caption read, "So proud of you. New beginning." I frowned slightly. Who was he? I clicked on his profile. His name was Michael Carter. They had multiple photos together. Trips. Events. Celebrations. They looked like a couple. I leaned back slowly. Because Emily had never mentioned anyone. Not a relationship. Not a partner. Nothing. I saved the screenshots. Then I waited for Daniel to return home. That evening, Daniel walked in. You okay? He asked. I found something, I said quietly. He sat beside me. I showed him the photos. He studied them carefully. She never told me about him, he said. Exactly. Daniel looked thoughtful. Maybe they broke up. Maybe, I agreed. But something still felt off. Because Emily had been very open about her feelings for Daniel. Yet she never mentioned this man. And that felt important. 2 days later, Emily called Daniel again. I was wondering if you could come by, she said. Daniel agreed. This time, I suggested something. Let's go together. Daniel nodded. We arrived at Emily's apartment. She greeted us warmly. But I noticed something different again. She seemed more nervous. More tense. We sat down. After a few minutes, she spoke. I hate asking this, but I don't know what else to do. Daniel remained quiet. I'm behind on rent, and I might lose this apartment. There it was. The moment we expected. Daniel looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry to hear that. She hesitated. I was hoping, maybe you could help me. Daniel didn't answer immediately. I watched carefully. How much? He asked quietly. She looked down. $3,000. Daniel leaned back slowly. The silence stretched. Then he spoke gently. I need some time to think. Emily nodded. I understand. But her expression showed disappointment. On the drive home, Daniel stayed quiet. Finally, he spoke. I don't know what to do. I nodded. I understand. He sighed. I feel guilty, especially after everything she told me. Yes, I said softly. But we still don't know the truth. Daniel nodded. You're right. Then I handed him my phone. What's this? He asked. More photos. He looked at them again. His expression slowly changed. She doesn't look like someone struggling. No, I replied quietly. Daniel leaned back. I think we need to dig deeper. I nodded. Because something about Emily's story was slowly falling apart. And I had a feeling. We were getting closer to revealing her true identity. But neither of us expected just how shocking that truth would be. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about the photos. Emily smiling on vacations. Dining in expensive restaurants. Standing beside Michael, looking happy, confident, comfortable. It didn't match the story she had told us. Someone struggling financially doesn't usually travel like that. Someone grieving for years doesn't usually look so settled. I sat quietly with my coffee, thinking. Then Daniel joined me. I barely slept, he admitted. Me neither, I replied. He sat down and looked at me. I keep thinking about her daughter. Lily. I nodded. That part bothers me the most. Me too, he said softly. Then he leaned forward. I want to find out the truth. I nodded slowly. Yes, me too. Later that afternoon, Daniel remembered something. She told me where Lily went to school. I looked at him. You remember the name? He nodded. Greenwood Elementary. That's nearby, I said. Daniel looked thoughtful. Maybe we can check. We drove there together. The school building looked quiet. It was after school hours, but the office was still open. We walked inside. A kind older woman greeted us. How can I help you? Daniel hesitated. We're trying to find information about a former student. She smiled politely. What's the name? Lily Harper, Daniel said softly. She checked the computer. After a moment, she frowned slightly. I'm sorry. I don't see that name in our records. Daniel looked surprised. Could you check again? She nodded and searched once more. Then she shook her head gently. I'm afraid there's no record. Daniel looked at me. The silence between us felt heavy. We thanked her and walked outside. Daniel stood still near the parking lot. "That's two places," he whispered. I nodded. "The hospital, and now the school." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "I don't understand, why would she lie about something like this?" I didn't answer. Because I was wondering the same thing. That evening, something unexpected happened. I received a call from an unknown number. "Hello? Is this Sarah?" "Yes. This is Linda. I'm Emily's neighbor." I froze slightly. "Yes? I hope I'm not overstepping, but I thought you should know something." My heart started beating faster. "What is it?" "I heard Emily talking on the phone yesterday, she sounded upset." I stayed quiet. "She mentioned your husband, and money." I felt a chill. "What exactly did she say?" Linda hesitated. "She said, once I get the money, I'll leave and everything will be settled." My heart sank. "Are you sure?" I asked softly. "Yes," Linda replied. "I didn't mean to overhear, but I thought you should know." "Thank you," I said quietly. After the call ended, I sat still, trying to process everything. Then Daniel walked in. "What's wrong?" he asked. I told him everything. He listened quietly. His expression slowly hardened. "I didn't want to believe it," he said quietly. "I know." He sighed. "But now, it's starting to make sense." We sat quietly together. Then Daniel spoke. "I think we need to confront her." I nodded slowly. "Yes, but carefully. Because we still didn't know everything." And I had a feeling. Emily wasn't just lying. She was hiding something bigger. Something that connected everything together. Her return. Her feelings. Her daughter. Her financial problems. All of it. And soon, the truth would finally come out. But neither of us expected just how shocking that truth would be. The next morning, Daniel and I agreed on one thing. We wouldn't confront Emily immediately. Instead, we would give her one more chance to be honest. Because sometimes, people reveal the truth when they believe they're close to getting what they want. Later that afternoon, Emily called again. Her voice sounded softer than usual. "Hi Daniel. I just wanted to check in." "I've been thinking," Daniel replied calmly. There was a short pause. "About what?" Emily asked. "About helping you." I watched Daniel carefully as he spoke. Emily's voice immediately changed. "Really?" "Yes, but I'd like to meet first." "Of course," she replied quickly. They agreed to meet that evening. After he hung up, Daniel looked at me. "You ready?" I nodded. Yes. Because we both knew, tonight might reveal everything. We arrived at Emily's apartment just before sunset. She greeted us warmly. But this time, I noticed something different. She seemed overly cheerful. Almost relieved. We sat in the living room. Emily looked at Daniel. "I really appreciate you considering helping me." Daniel nodded calmly. "I just want to understand everything first." "Of course," she replied. Daniel took a slow breath. "Emily. I need to ask you something." She nodded. "Anything. Are you being completely honest with us?" Her smile faded slightly. "What do you mean?" Daniel remained calm. "The hospital records, the school, we couldn't find anything." Emily's face went pale. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she laughed nervously. "Maybe they lost the records, it's been many years." I watched her carefully. "Emily," I said gently, "we also noticed the photo with the bakery." She froze. Her hands tightened slightly. "What about it?" "That bakery opened 5 years ago, I said softly. Silence filled the room. Emily looked at Daniel. Then back at me. Her calm expression slowly disappeared. Finally, she sighed. I didn't think you'd check. Daniel leaned forward. Emily, what's going on? She looked down. Then she spoke quietly. Lily wasn't your daughter. The words hung heavily in the air. Daniel sat back slowly. What? She was my niece, Emily admitted. She lived with me for a while, and after she passed away, I kept her photos. Daniel looked stunned. But why would you lie? Emily hesitated. I didn't know how else to reconnect with you. Her honesty felt shocking. You lied about a child? Daniel asked quietly. Tears filled her eyes. I thought, if you believed we had a daughter, you would care about me again. The room fell silent. I felt a mixture of emotions. Shock. Sadness. Disappointment. Daniel looked hurt. Emily, that's not something you lie about. I know, she whispered. I was desperate. Then Daniel asked quietly. And the financial problems? Emily hesitated again. I do have some debts. But not as bad as you said? I asked gently. She shook her head. No. Daniel leaned back. Everything was becoming clear. The lies. The emotional story. The request for money. Emily wiped her tears. I didn't mean to hurt you. I just didn't know what else to do. Daniel stayed silent. Then he spoke calmly. Emily. I think you should have just been honest. She nodded. You're right. There was a long silence. Finally, Emily spoke softly. I guess I ruined everything. Daniel looked at her kindly. I don't hate you, Emily, but I can't trust you anymore. Her eyes filled with tears again. I understand. We stood up to leave. Emily didn't try to stop us. She just sat quietly. As we walked out, I felt something shift. The tension. The uncertainty. The confusion. It was slowly lifting. Because the truth had finally begun to surface. But deep down, I still felt like something was missing. Because even though Emily admitted to lying, I had a feeling. There was still more she hadn't told us. And I was right. Because what we would discover next would reveal her true identity and change everything. The drive home felt quieter than usual. But this time, it wasn't heavy with confusion. It was heavy with disappointment. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his expression thoughtful. I never expected this, he said quietly. Me neither, I replied. He sighed. I kept thinking about that little girl, imagining what life would have been like. I know. He nodded slowly. I guess I wanted to believe it. I reached over and gently placed my hand on his. That's understandable. We drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Daniel spoke again. But there's still something bothering me. What? I asked. She lied about Lily and exaggerated her financial problems, but why now? I thought about that. Yes, the timing is strange. Daniel nodded. And there's also that man. Michael. I looked at him. You're right. Emily had never mentioned him. Not once. And that felt important. The next day, I decided to do something simple. I looked up Michael's profile again. This time, I noticed something new. His relationship status. It said, married. My heart skipped. I clicked further. His wife's name appeared. Emily Harper. I stared at the screen. Confused. Emily, married? That didn't make sense. She told us she was struggling alone. She said she had no one. But here, she appeared married. I quickly called Daniel. You need to see this. When he came home, I showed him the profile. He looked stunned. She's married? That's what it says. Daniel leaned back slowly. So, she's not alone. I shook my head. No. He frowned. Then why would she tell us she was struggling? We sat quietly, trying to make sense of everything. Later that evening, something unexpected happened. Emily called Daniel again. He looked at me before answering. I nodded. Hello? Her voice sounded softer. Daniel. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. He listened quietly. I shouldn't have lied, she continued. I was just afraid. Daniel remained calm. I understand. I also wanted to tell you. I'll be moving soon. Daniel looked surprised. Moving? Yes. I think it's best if I start fresh somewhere else. He nodded slowly. Maybe that's a good idea. She hesitated. I hope we can still part on good terms. Daniel glanced at me. Yes. I think we can. After the call ended, Daniel sighed. Maybe this is the end of it. I nodded slowly. Maybe. But deep down, I wasn't completely convinced. Because something still felt unfinished. 2 days later, I was grocery shopping when I saw something unexpected. Emily. She was standing near the entrance. But she wasn't alone. She was with a man. I recognized him immediately. Michael. They looked comfortable. Relaxed. Not like two people struggling. They were laughing. Talking casually. I stayed at a distance. Watching quietly. Then I saw something else. Emily handed him an envelope. He took it and nodded. They looked serious for a moment. Then they walked out together. My heart began to race. Something about that interaction felt strange. I finished shopping quickly and returned home. When Daniel arrived, I told him everything. He listened carefully. She handed him an envelope, he asked. Yes. Daniel frowned. That's strange. We sat quietly. Then Daniel spoke slowly. Maybe we should talk to her one last time. I nodded. Yes, one last time. Because now, it wasn't just about lies. It was about understanding who Emily really was. And why she had truly returned. Because the truth was still waiting to be uncovered. And when it finally came out, it would change everything. The next evening, Daniel called Emily. His voice was calm, polite. Emily, could we meet one more time? There was a short pause. Of course, she replied quietly. They agreed to meet at a small cafe the following afternoon. When we arrived, Emily was already there. She looked tired. Different. Less confident than before. She gave us a small smile. I figured you might want to talk. Daniel sat down slowly. Yes, there are still a few things we don't understand. Emily nodded. I expected that. I watched her carefully. Daniel spoke gently. Emily, are you married? Her expression changed immediately. She hesitated. Then she looked down. Yes. The answer came quietly. But it felt heavy. Daniel leaned back. You never told me. I know, she admitted. Why? I asked softly. Emily sighed. Because, my marriage isn't what it seems. Daniel looked at her. What do you mean? She hesitated. Then she spoke slowly. Michael and I were separated. I listened carefully. But you still live together? I asked. Sometimes, she admitted. Things are complicated. Daniel stayed quiet. Then he asked gently. And the envelope you gave him? Emily looked surprised. You saw that? I nodded. She took a deep breath. That was money I owed him. Daniel frowned slightly. Owed him? Emily nodded. Yes, he helped me with some business expenses. Business? Daniel repeated. She hesitated again. I started a small online business last year. It didn't go well. Daniel nodded slowly. Everything sounded possible. But something still felt incomplete. Then Daniel asked quietly. Emily, why did you really come back? She looked at him. Her eyes softened. I told you. I wanted to reconnect. But was that the only reason? I asked gently. Emily stayed silent for a moment. Then she spoke honestly. I also needed support. Daniel nodded. Emotional support? She hesitated. And financial support, she admitted softly. The honesty felt heavy. Daniel sighed quietly. I appreciate your honesty now. Emily nodded. I should have been honest from the beginning. There was a long silence. Then Emily looked at Daniel. I never meant to hurt your marriage. Daniel gave a small, gentle nod. I know. She looked at me. I'm sorry, Sarah. I nodded. Thank you for saying that. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I think it's best if I move away soon. Daniel nodded. That might be for the best. We finished our coffee quietly. As we stood to leave, Emily spoke softly. I hope you two stay happy. Daniel gave a small smile. Thank you. We walked out of the cafe. This time, something felt different. The tension was gone. The confusion was fading. But as we walked toward the car, Daniel suddenly stopped. What is it? I asked. He looked back toward the cafe window. Emily was still sitting there. But now, she wasn't alone. Michael had just walked in. They sat together. And almost immediately, they began talking seriously. Daniel frowned slightly. That's fast, he murmured. I nodded. Yes, very fast. We stood quietly for a moment. Watching. Then Daniel shook his head. Maybe we're overthinking. Maybe, I agreed. But deep down, I still felt something unsettled. Because even though Emily had apologized, even though she admitted her lies, I still felt like we hadn't seen the full picture. And sometimes, the final truth only appears right before everything ends. And that final truth was closer than we realized. That evening, Daniel and I sat quietly at home. The house felt calm again. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension between us. No uncertainty. No quiet distance. Just peace. Daniel leaned back on the couch. I think it's finally over. I nodded softly. Yes. I think so too. He reached for my hand. I'm sorry, he said quietly. For what? For letting things go this far, for not seeing things clearly sooner. I squeezed his hand gently. You were trying to understand your past. That's normal. He smiled faintly. But my future has always been here. His words warmed my heart. 16 years. And somehow, we had come out stronger. 2 days later, something unexpected happened. Emily knocked on our door. I opened it. She stood there with a small box in her hands. Hi, she said softly. Hi, Emily. Daniel came to the door as well. She smiled gently. I just came to say goodbye. Goodbye? Daniel asked. Yes. I'm leaving tomorrow. We invited her inside. She handed Daniel the box. What's this? He asked. Just something I thought you should have. He opened it carefully. Inside were old photographs. Not of Lily, but of him and Emily from years ago. I thought you might want these, she said quietly. Daniel looked at them slowly. Thank you. Emily nodded. Then she looked at me. I meant what I said. I'm sorry for everything. I believe you, I replied softly. She gave a small, grateful smile. Then she took a deep breath. There's one more thing. I want to tell you both. Daniel and I exchanged a glance. What is it? He asked. Emily hesitated. Then she spoke quietly. I didn't just come back for money, or for old feelings. We listened carefully. I came back because I was lonely. Her voice trembled slightly. My marriage failed, my business failed, and I realized I didn't have anyone I truly trusted. She looked at Daniel. You were the only person who ever made me feel safe. Daniel nodded gently. I understand. Emily gave a small smile. But I realized you've already built something stronger. She looked at both of us. And I shouldn't try to take that away. Her words felt sincere. Quiet. Honest. She stood up slowly. I hope you both stay happy. Daniel walked her to the door. Take care, Emily. You too. She gave one last smile. Then she left. We watched from the window as she walked to her car. For a moment, she paused. Then she drove away. And just like that, she was gone. That night, Daniel and I sat quietly together. The house felt peaceful again. Finally, Daniel spoke. You know, I think this happened for a reason. I looked at him. Why? He smiled softly. Because it reminded me how much I value what we have. I smiled. I feel the same way. He wrapped his arm around me. And for the first time in weeks, everything felt normal again. Sometimes, life brings people back from the past. Not to break what we have, but to remind us why we built it in the first place. Emily returned with secrets. With confusion. With emotions from another time. But in the end, she didn't break our marriage. She strengthened it. Because love isn't tested when things are easy. Love is tested when the past returns. And you still choose each other. And that's exactly what we did. We chose each other. Again. And again. And again.